My name is Dr. Lillian Cross. I'm 34 years old. We're at the awards dinner for my cousin's promotion to Regional Finance Director mahogany walls, clinking forks, long white tablecloths. I'm seated 3 chairs away from my father, close enough to hear him even when he doesn't raise his voice. He does tonight. She's got 3 PhDs and still can't figure out how to get a real job. My fork pauses mid-air. I don't look up. I don't blink. I just lower it back to the plate. He laughs. A few others join him. Not everyone, but enough to stain the air. The room smells like roasted duck and Pinot Noir. Overhead, amber pendant lights throw soft shadows against the walls. Across the room, a man in a sharply pressed dress uniform pauses mid-step. His rank 4 silver stars. He looks at me. Recognition flickers across his face. Then he turns, slowly walks toward the podium, and when he speaks into the microphone, everything stops. The clinking quiets. Even the waitstaff freeze mid-pour. He doesn't mention the award recipient, doesn't greet the crowd. He just scans the room, voice even and low. There are minds in this country so brilliant they don't wear uniforms, but we take our orders from them. My father stiffens beside me. His wine glass clinks against the plate just a little too loud. His laughter's gone. So is the smirk. The general's eyes meet mine for half a second. Then he nods not to the crowd, just to me, and steps off the stage like nothing happened. I stay seated. I don't say a word. For a long moment, no one speaks. My cousin half stands, unsure whether to accept the plaque on the table. Someone clears their throat. The MC stammers something about dinner service resuming. I press my napkin gently into my lap, careful not to let it wrinkle. Across the table, my aunt mouths silently to her daughter, "Who was that for?" I catch it. I catch all of it. My father avoids looking at me. Instead, he reaches for the bread basket with a hand that shakes slightly. That's when I realize he knows. He knows the general wasn't improvising. That sentence wasn't for the room. It was for me. The same daughter he dismissed 10 minutes ago like I was a child who hadn't done anything with her life. I should feel vindicated, but all I feel is quiet. The rest of the meal blurs into a soft murmur, distant clatter, low hum, the scraping of utensils. Conversations shift to anything else. Promotions, property taxes, cruises, retirement. No one dares bring up the general again. Not even my cousin, who was supposed to be the reason we were all here. After the dessert creme brulee untouched, my mother leans in. "You didn't tell me you knew him." I smile. "Barely." "You didn't ask." Outside, the wind's picked up. It's early spring, just sharp enough to bite under the chiffon of my sleeves. The valet line snakes past the hedges. A black SUV pulls up, government plates. The general gets in without looking back. I feel my father step beside me. He doesn't say anything, just stands there, hands in his coat pockets, silent. I glance at him once, just once. He doesn't meet my eyes. We ride in the same car back to the hotel. The silence stretches. I can feel it sitting between us in the back seat all the years, all the questions he never asked, all the things he never saw because he didn't think to look. When we get out, he lingers by the door. Finally, he says, "You didn't? Tell us you worked with people like that." I look him straight in the eye. "You didn't think it mattered." He opens his mouth like he wants to argue. Then he just nods once stiffly, like maybe he just realized how wrong he's been for a very long time. We ride the elevator in silence. My floor's first. I don't say goodbye. I don't need to. The door closes on the look still stuck on his face. That's when I exhale. That's when the ache in my chest shifts, not relief, not triumph. Just a little more space, a little more air. My father is not a cruel man, but he is a man of a certain kind, proud-rooted in results he can touch measure way. He believes in brick and steel. He trusts things with weight. I've never had that kind of weight in his eyes. He worked construction his whole life, bridges, pylons, oil rigs, calloused hands, loud tools, early mornings. He earned everything through sweat and brawn and hours clocked. He raised me to believe that work was a thing you could show someone. Point at it. Say I built that. What I built couldn't be pointed at. Not to him. I was the girl who read until her eyes stung. While other kids were outside, I sat on the floor tracing formulas, flipping dictionaries, studying maps of systems most people never see. I was quiet, polite, never caused problems, never needed help, but I didn't shine in the way that mattered to my family. My older brother Danny did. He went into finance straight out of college, MBA by 24, big watch corner office. He brings printouts to dinner just so Dad can run the numbers with him. They speak in the language of deals, metrics, targets. Real things. When I told them I was pursuing my first PhD in computational linguistics, my father didn't even flinch. PhD. Why, you already graduated, didn't you? I tried to explain just a little. That it wasn't about school, it was about knowledge. About unlocking the invisible architecture behind how we think, translate, command. He stared at me like I'd grown another head. That's not a job, Lillian. That's a hobby. I stopped trying to explain after that. I just kept going. The second doctorate came 4 years later, strategic modeling with a focus on irregular conflict patterns. The third took longer. That one cost me sleep, blood pressure, and 2 almost relationships. Artificial cognition war theory, neurolinguistics. He never asked what they were. Mom at least tried. She sent small notes, proud of you, take care of your health, we'll visit after the holidays. But she never came. They always had something taxes a friend's retirement party, Danny's big presentation. I stopped waiting. I got used to living without applause, but not without ache. You learn to carry it quietly like a folded note in your pocket, small enough to hide, heavy enough to feel every step. When I finished my third doctorate, I mailed them the graduation photo out of courtesy. It was the only one I had black robe gold cords standing between 2 colonels and a civilian contractor with clearances higher than most senators. Dad never asked who they were. He just called, "You done now?" "Yes. So what are you going to do with all that work?" "Where everywhere." A pause. "Well, just don't expect anyone to understand what the hell you're doing." And that was that. I told myself it didn't matter. That I didn't need their understanding that my work existed beyond their table, their town, their limited orbit. And in some ways, that was true. But I'd be lying if I said it didn't hurt, because it wasn't strangers dismissing me, it was family. And the thing about being dismissed quietly is that it accumulates. Over time, it becomes a kind of erasure. I stopped coming home for birthdays, then for Christmas. Eventually, I only saw them at weddings and funerals events where someone else's presence demanded mine. The irony is, I never needed distance because I had something to hide. I needed it because they never looked hard enough to see. The last time I visited before the dinner, Dad had a friend over, a retired Navy guy. Big, loud, full of stories. He asked what I did. Before I could speak, Dad answered for me. "She's still in school, professional student." I wasn't. I was briefing Joint Task Force leaders in Bahrain that spring, consulting on cross-theater communication breaches. But I just smiled. Said nothing. The man chuckled and turned back to his beer. That was the moment I understood something important. They weren't proud of me because they didn't believe in me. Not really. When you grow up in a world where power is loud, you learn that silence feels like failure. I grew up silent. Not because I had nothing to say, but because the moment I opened my mouth, they'd already decided it wasn't worth listening to. So I built my life in the quiet. I found the rooms where silence meant strength, where soft voices carried more weight than thunder. And slowly, quietly, I rose. I still don't think my father could name a single institution I've worked with. Not one agency, not one briefed operation, not one think tank or classified model I've helped architect. He just knows I'm always flying somewhere, always unavailable, always distant. I wonder if he ever asked why. When the general looked at me across that dinner hall, when his eyes registered and his words pierced the noise, it wasn't about spectacle. It was about being seen, finally, by someone who didn't need me to prove anything, because he already knew. It was never one big betrayal. It was erosion. A slow, invisible scrape like water against stone. Small things taken piece by piece. By the time I realized what was gone, I didn't know where to look for it. It started with the fellowship. I'd just received confirmation a classified joint research project between DARPA and a European signals group. It wasn't just a job, it was the job. The kind of work that meant traveling with a closed passport, answering to no one but the director and the lead attaché. I hadn't told my family. Not yet. I thought maybe just once I'd tell them after. After the papers were signed, the clearance finalized the flight scheduled. After I could sit down at their table, take a breath, and say I made it. But they found out first. Danny called me that evening, his voice too smooth, too amused. "So you're off to be some kind of spy now, huh?" I froze. "What are you talking about? Dad said you're working on some secret project overseas. Thought I'd call before you vanish." My chest tightened. I never told Dad about the project, only that I was finishing a research submission. He must have guessed or snooped. Maybe saw something in my mail. Or maybe worse, he'd been talking to someone. A connection, a friend from his old crew, someone who bragged that his daughter wasn't just playing with books. And instead of keeping it to himself, he told everyone. The next week, my cousin posted a photo from our last Christmas dinner with the caption, "She's the quiet one." Probably an MI6 now. It was supposed to be a joke, but my phone wouldn't stop buzzing. I had to shut down 2 encrypted accounts. Issue a level 2 alert with the liaison, re-verify clearance logs. I almost lost the fellowship over a caption. That was the first thing they cost me, not on purpose, just by treating my life like it didn't matter. After that, I pulled away. Calls went unanswered, holidays missed, emails left unread. Still, it didn't stop. Danny's wedding came next. I wasn't going to attend, but my mother called crying. "Please, just this once. You're his sister." So I flew in 23 hours of travel for a 4-hour event. I wore a plain black dress, nothing flashy, just enough to disappear in the crowd. But I didn't disappear. The reception was outdoors manicured lawn, warm lamps strung between white poles. Someone handed me a champagne glass before I'd even found a seat. I stood near the back under the edge of the canopy. That's when I heard my name. "That's Lillian, the one with all the degrees. She works for the government or something." Laughter. "I heard she lives out of a suitcase. No house, no family. Sounds lonely, sounds fake." They were Danny's friends. Not cruel, just careless. The kind of careless that cuts deeper than cruelty. I stood still like a photograph, didn't move, didn't correct them, didn't leave. When Dad came over, he clapped me on the shoulder. "You're always gone. You should have stayed local." Could have been a professor, something normal. I looked at him. "I don't want normal." "No, I guess you don't." There was no malice, just distance. Like we weren't speaking the same language, and we never would. That was the second thing they took my name. They made it something to explain, to shrink. It's not really like that. She's always been the weird one. The more I achieved, the more invisible I became, because it didn't fit their idea of who I was. At one point, I tried dating someone from back home, Ben. He was kind, steady, ran a logistics firm, knew how to build things. My mom adored him. He didn't last, not because of distance, because he wanted to help me simplify. "You're brilliant, Lil, but don't you ever get tired of chasing things I'm not chasing?" "No, I know. I just mean, when will it ever be enough?" That question cracked something in me, because I'd never asked for more. I just wanted space to do what I was good at. But to people like Ben and my family, ambition in a woman always came with a clock. You had until 35. Then you were just difficult. The final blow came last fall. I submitted a model to an interagency task force, a live scenario algorithm for real-time interpretation of fractured data from conflict zones. 3 weeks later, the model was tagged and deployed. A month after that, a former advisor forwarded me the briefing report. "Your logic tree prevented a strike. Just thought you should know." I stared at the email for a long time. My name wasn't on the file. It never would be. That was the job. That was the deal. But I saved lives that day. Real lives. And I didn't tell a soul. Not because it was classified, but because I knew even if I said it out loud, my family would just nod politely and ask, "But when are you going to settle down?" That was the third thing they took, the joy of the win. Because when no one believes in you, victory becomes private, and private victory feels a lot like grief. I still remember what Mom said the night before that awards dinner. Just come for the family. Don't make it about you. She didn't say it with malice. She meant it as kindness. But what she really meant was, don't remind them you outgrew this. And so I sat at that dinner table 3 chairs from my father listening to him dismiss me like a stranger. And I said nothing, because that's what I'd been trained to do. It doesn't happen all at once. It happens in the stillness when the noise has faded and there's no applause, no validation, not even a clock ticking on the wall. That's where I fell. Not in the chaos, in the quiet. I'd just come back from Germany, a midnight flight into DC, sleepless and numb. I'd spent 2 months embedded with a joint multilingual AI team near Ramstein, helping track fragmentary speech from unmapped insurgent channels. It had worked. It had worked better than anyone projected, but no one greeted me at the gate. No one asked how it went. There were no flowers, no letters, no dinners waiting in the fridge, just a dark apartment and a blinking router light. I set my duffel down on the floor, stood there with my coat still on, my boots still damp. The heater hadn't kicked on. The cold settled into my bones, and that's when the voice inside whispered, "What are you doing all this for?" I didn't answer, because I didn't know. I curled into the couch that night without changing clothes. Open laptop, blue light on my skin. I didn't check my official accounts. I opened my personal inbox dusty unread. 10 emails. 8 of them were spam. 1 from an old grad school classmate. The last was from my mom. Subject, just thinking of you. Hi, sweetheart. Hope you're safe. Danny says the baby's first tooth is coming in. He and Monica are over the moon. Dad asked if you'll be at Thanksgiving this year. He says he misses your dry turkey. He's joking, I think. I know you're busy. Just wanted to say we're proud even if we don't always understand what you do. Love, Mom. I stared at it for a long time, even if we don't always understand. I know she meant well, but that sentence dug deeper than she knew. I closed the laptop, stood in the middle of the room again, arms wrapped around myself. The weight in my chest wasn't exhaustion. It was loneliness, the kind that turns your ribs into a cage. There's this myth that women who succeed alone are fearless, that we're cold or untouchable or somehow made of stone. But that's a lie. The truth is, we feel everything. We just learn not to show it. Because the moment we do, the world calls us unstable. There were mornings that month I couldn't get out of bed. Not because I was sick, but because I couldn't see the point. I'd wake up and just lie there staring at the ceiling, my degrees framed on the wall, my credentials locked behind a password. None of it reached me. One night, I went to the grocery store just to see other humans, walked the aisles like a ghost. I stood in front of the frozen meals and thought no one would notice if I just disappeared. Not out of melodrama, but because I meant it. Literally. No one would call. No one would knock. I had made myself invisible out of necessity, out of survival. And now I didn't know how to be seen. I started to believe them, the voices that said I was too much, too distant, too academic, too ambitious, too everything, and still not enough. The irony, I was helping design psychological resilience models for agents working behind lines. But I couldn't even hold my own mind steady. I remember one day mid-November, gray and brittle, I walked past a bookstore downtown. There was a child sitting cross-legged inside reading. A little girl, 7, maybe 8. She looked just like me at that age, glasses a little too big, knees scuffed, absolutely lost in a page. And it hit me like a fist. She has no idea what's coming. All the times she'll be told she's too quiet, too strange, too smart, too intimidating. All the rooms she'll walk into where her words will be stolen, her credit reassigned, her value questioned. All the times she'll doubt her own mind, not because it's wrong, but because the world never learned how to listen to a woman like her. I pressed my hand to the glass, just lightly. She didn't look up. But I whispered anyway, "Don't let them shrink you." I don't know if I was talking to her or to myself. Maybe both. That night, I sat on the edge of my bathtub fully clothed. I didn't cry, I just sat there. Still. Completely still. I think I was waiting to feel something. Maybe anger, maybe grief, maybe fire. But it didn't come. Just silence, just air. I was one breath away from giving up, not on life, on meaning. I thought about quitting, deleting the accounts, returning the credentials, packing the degrees into a storage box, and mailing them to my father with a note. Here, you can keep them. They never mattered to you anyway. And then I'd vanish, move to a small town, teach middle school science, grow tomatoes. Let the world forget me. I almost did it. Truly, I had the form open. I was hovering over the keyboard. Resignation, irrevocable. My cursor blinked at the top of the letter, to whom it may concern. But I couldn't type the next sentence. My fingers wouldn't move. My breath hitched. And somewhere buried under the numbness, I heard it. A voice. Small. Quiet. But mine. You were never doing this for them. And I stopped. I didn't submit the resignation. I closed the document and shut the laptop like I'd just sealed a door I wasn't meant to walk through. But I still didn't feel relief. Just blankness. Like the part of me that used to believe in something had shut down for maintenance. Lights still on, but no signal. I stopped checking my secure channels, let the inbox pile up, didn't return calls from the Joint Ops Coordinator, even missed a message from someone I respected, a quiet genius at Langley who didn't compliment often. I hear whispers about your Ramstein work. We're watching it. Keep moving. I stared at it for a full day before deleting it. I wasn't angry. I wasn't burned out. I was erased, and it was my own hand on the eraser. A week later, I was walking back from a dry cleaner with a suit bag slung over my shoulder, not because I had anywhere to wear it, but because I didn't know what else to do with my body that day. It was drizzling, soft, and cold. Early December. I passed an alley near the Capitol Hill Metro and saw a mural being painted, a massive face made of code letters cascading into shadows. A young woman stood on scaffolding, black beanie paint on her fingers. She was maybe 20, and she was painting me. Not literally, but close enough that it stopped me cold. I stood at the edge of the sidewalk and watched as she stepped back, hands on her hips. There, 5 feet above the brick, the eyes of a woman like me, brow furrowed, mouth unsmiling, power in the silence of her face. She looked like she'd seen too much, and survived it. And beneath the image, the artist had written, "Speak without needing to explain." I stared until the drizzle soaked through my coat. That night, I dreamed I was underwater, deep, silent, cold, and I could see my old notebooks floating above me, pages of equations models scribbled insights. But I couldn't reach them. I just watched them drift, and when I finally woke up, heart pounding, the ceiling looked different. Or maybe I did. I sat on the floor that morning and took out a small metal box from under the bed. A lockbox, the kind you only open when everything else falls apart. Inside, my father's old dog tags. He gave them to me when I turned 18. A rare gesture. No words. Just a firm press into my palm. He never served in combat, just reserves. But he wore those tags like they mattered. I held them now, cold, solid, humming with memory, and I thought he had something to be proud of. And then, quietly, so do I. It wasn't about revenge. It wasn't even about recognition. It was about reclamation, of voice, of identity, of worth. I didn't jump up and write a plan. There was no movie montage moment, no inspirational music. Just the slow, steady inhale of someone who's been underwater too long and is finally breathing again. I went to the kitchen, made coffee, and sat down at the table, the one nobody ever saw, and I began again. That day, I returned to my secure inbox. Hundreds of unread messages. Most were noise. Some were buried gold. I opened one marked Classified Priority Asset Contact Proposal. It was short, requesting consultation on long-latency behavioral modeling for leadership profiling. You've been listed as first lens for assessment. Code attached. Discretion critical. It came from a name I didn't recognize, but I knew the format. They didn't send messages like this unless it mattered, not in a theoretical way, in a national way. I replied with a single line, available. Begin brief Monday 0900. Secure line preferred. No signature, no title. No degrees, just the decision to keep going. I didn't call my family. I didn't update my location tracker for Mom. Didn't tell Danny I'd be overseas again soon. Didn't tell anyone I'd re-engaged, because I finally understood their understanding wasn't required. Their approval wasn't currency. Their pride was not my mission. But I was still human, still their daughter. And the ache didn't vanish. It softened, like a scar, no longer a wound, but a map. A few nights later, I sat with a small photo in my lap, one from years ago. Me at 19 in a library basement. No makeup, giant hoodie, knees pulled up to my chest, reading some dense Soviet-era decryption manual like it was a love letter. I remember how fierce she was, how unafraid of being misunderstood, how sure she was of the mind she carried. I whispered to her like I did to that girl in the bookstore, "You're still here." Then I pulled out a pad, started sketching new outlines, ideas, flow maps, protocols, things I hadn't touched in weeks. I worked until dawn, not because I had to, because I wanted to. And when the sun came up over the city, gold bleeding across rooftops, I stood at the window and said one thing out loud. No one heard it but me. But that was enough. I'm not done yet. I didn't announce my return. I didn't post, didn't text, didn't say I'm back. I just moved. Like water slipping through stone. Like something that had always been there, waiting for the right silence to grow in. The Monday briefing came as promised. Secure line, encrypted screen. Blank faces and no names. But I knew who they were. I'd read their signals before between sentences in the way one blinked more often when discussing indirect assets and how another crossed her arms during the phrase cross-jurisdictional modeling. They were senior. They were listening. And they were afraid of the wrong things. I let them finish their briefing first. 24 slides, 4 overlapping concerns, 1 very big blind spot. Then I spoke. Calm. Even. You're targeting behaviors. But what you need to model are decisions. Silence. One of them shifted in his seat. Another opened a notepad. I walked them through it. Not a show, not a flex, just math. Systems, signals, patterns. I let the work speak. It always had, but this time I stopped apologizing for how sharp it sounded. By the end of the session, the woman with the crossed arms looked up and said, "Can you brief that to Joint Command?" I nodded once. Tomorrow. When I hung up, I didn't celebrate. I sat back, took a slow breath, ran a hand over the tabletop. It was still just a table, but something inside me had shifted. Not pride, not power, presence. That week, I reactivated 3 accounts tied to black box think tanks I'd been quietly advising before the spiral. No one questioned my return. They simply picked up where we'd left off, because they never doubted my worth. Only I had. I updated one model overnight, helped rewire a scenario tree for a cyber drill in under 8 hours, reframed a language threat vector for a mid-Pacific station so cleanly their commander requested my signature, even if redacted. It wasn't about revenge. It was about rhythm. And I had it again. People don't understand what it means to carry authority in silence. They think respect is loud. That power arrives with volume. But the sharpest operators I've ever met, they barely speak at all. And when they do, it's surgical. By Thursday, I had an invitation to attend a private closed door at Langley. Unusual, but not unprecedented. The email was short, embedded in code, no signature. Just your frameworks changed how we look at language. We need you in the room. I knew that room, had been there once before. At 29, during a cross-sector fail-safe evaluation. I'd spoken for 11 minutes, and no one had looked at me directly the entire time. Now they were asking. I wore black, no heels, no jewelry, just a tailored jacket and boots that could walk for hours if needed. I arrived early. There were 3 of them in the conference room already, none I recognized. The 4th arrived after me. He didn't speak when he entered, just removed his coat, nodded, and sat. But I knew. 4 stars, thin silver line on his collar. Quiet eyes that scanned, not stared. Him. We didn't greet each other, not formally, but his gaze met mine briefly, just long enough to say, I remember. He didn't smile. He didn't need to. The session ran long: crisis simulation, communication failure scenarios, 3 threat overlays stacked like glass slides. I only spoke twice, but both times he looked at me when I did, and when the others argued, he waited for me to speak again. After the meeting, I gathered my notes. One of the analysts younger leaned over and said, "I didn't know who you were." I looked up. "You don't need to." He blinked. "No, I mean. I Googled you. There's nothing. That's the point." He looked embarrassed, but not insulted. He understood. Some people build legacies in the spotlight. Others build the light. That evening, I walked back through the compound courtyard, early dusk, bleeding across the stone. And for the first time in weeks, no months, I felt steady. Not fixed, not full, but steady. I returned to my apartment and found a message waiting on the landline, one I almost never checked. It was from my mother. "Hi, honey. Just wondering where you are these days. Dad said he saw something about you on TV. He didn't say what, just that someone important mentioned you. Anyway, call when you can." She hung up quickly. Her voice was soft, nervous, like she knew she'd crossed into a space she didn't recognize. I didn't call back that night. I didn't have words yet. But I sat on the edge of my bed holding the phone like it was something precious. Not because they missed me, but because they were starting to wonder. And wondering is the first step to seeing. I remembered something my advisor once told me years ago after my first research was flagged as too abstract. Stay where they can't quite pin you down, Cross. That's where the power is. At the time, I didn't understand. Now I did. I wasn't just a scholar, not just a strategist, not just a woman who knew 12 dialects and 3 machine-coded systems. I was something they hadn't accounted for, a stillness they couldn't map, a signal they couldn't jam. And I was only just getting started. The invitation came 3 days later. Not an email, not a text. An envelope, heavy, hand-delivered, no return address. Just my name in black ink. Inside, a single sheet. Gold-trimmed. Langley Recognition Briefing. Tier 1 Operators, Strategic Influence Awards. Closed session. Attire formal. You will be called by name. There was no RSVP link, no regret to decline box, no number to call. Just a silent command. Show up. I should have felt triumphant. But I didn't, because something in me had already shifted. This, the recognition, it wasn't the summit. It was the echo. The summit was the moment I reclaimed myself without needing an audience. This was just what happened when you moved in integrity long enough for the world to catch up. Still I went. I chose Navy. Dark, serious, unapologetic. No borrowed necklace, no designer label. Just clean lines, a low bun, and flat shoes. Because I wasn't there to impress. I was there to exist in full. They held it in the underground chamber. I'd been there once before as an observer hidden in the last row, elbows tucked, mind racing. Now my name was on the program. I stepped through security, showed no badge, just the letter. They waved me through, down the long hallway, under vaulted lights, past the names etched in brass, past the rows of men who didn't even glance up, until one of them did. 4 stars, again. The same general from the last briefing. This time he stopped. He didn't say hello, just looked at me and asked, "You know why they chose you?" I shook my head slightly. He leaned in. "Because we finally listened to what you didn't say." Then he nodded and walked in. I stood for a second stunned, not because I needed his words, but because I hadn't realized how clearly my silence had spoken. The room was full, quiet, still. Dozens of people I didn't recognize. A few I did all in higher seats than I remembered. No clapping, just a shift in posture when the director took the podium. She was tall, sharp-voiced, unsmiling, not warm, but precise. Her eyes scanned the room. "We don't hand these out for charm. We don't hand these out for visibility. We hand these out when someone alters the direction of a threat." Quietly. Her gaze paused on me, then continued. "We call forward 1 person today. No press, no record, just acknowledgement." A pause. Cross. My name echoed. Not Dr. Cross. Not Ms. Just Cross. Like I was both signal and cipher. I stood, walked the narrow aisle, didn't trip, didn't smile, just breathed. When I reached the front, the director held out a small box. I took it. She didn't shake my hand, but she did say one word. Finally. The room didn't applaud, but every person there watched, and that meant more. Because you only study what you respect. Afterward, I slipped out early. No post-brief drinks, no handshakes or networking. I stepped into the courtyard where the air was colder than expected. And there he was again. The general. This time, waiting. He didn't speak at first, just looked at me. Then slowly he took a folded piece of paper from his pocket and handed it to me. He wrote this. I didn't have to ask who. My father. I took the note with a still hand, unfolded it. The handwriting was unmistakable. Angular. Controlled. If you're reading this, I was wrong. I don't know what else to say. You didn't need my belief to become what you are. But I hope you'll let me listen now. It wasn't long, but I had to sit down, because something inside me tight for years unknotted. The general sat beside me on the low stone bench, not close, but near enough. Then he said, "We don't choose who sees us, but we choose how we move before they do." I looked over at him. Why did you bring it? Because he couldn't. Why couldn't he? Because shame isn't easy to walk with. He stood, but you did. Then he left. I sat there a long time, holding that piece of paper. It weighed more than any plaque or medal ever could. Because it wasn't proof of what I'd achieved. It was proof of what I'd outgrown. Back at my apartment, I placed the note on my desk, not framed, not stored away, just there, like a second heartbeat in the room. I didn't call my father, not yet, because this wasn't a moment to be rushed. It was a moment to live inside. Later that week, I sent one message, not to him, but to my mother. Tell him I got his note. I'm still listening too. Just on my own time. She replied a minute later. He sat still for 20 minutes after writing it, just holding the pen. I don't know what comes next, but I do know this power is not what they give you. It's what you remember about yourself when they stop looking, and I had remembered everything. The museum courtyard hadn't changed in years. Ivy still curled lazily up the sandstone columns like it had nowhere else to go. The same bronze statue of General Hayes stood guard in the corner, his saber drawn, his eyes steeled toward some ghost of an enemy no one remembered. And beneath the same striped awning, they'd set up a rickety wooden podium polished to an artificial shine. It was the perfect place for a performance. And that's what today was. A performance. I arrived 15 minutes early, not out of eagerness, but precision. I knew my father would be early too. He always was for anything that involved an audience. But I wasn't there for him. Not anymore. I walked in through the north gate. The sun struck my back warm and high, casting my shadow long across the stone. I kept my chin-up steps steady. I wore navy slacks and a cream blouse, formal but subdued. No medals, no pins, no indication that I'd once briefed joint task forces at NATO. No hint that my doctoral work had shaped the drone AI ethics guidelines they were now celebrating. If my father wanted a narrative, I wasn't going to give him mine. But he saw me. Of course he did. "She's here," he said, not looking at me, speaking to no one in particular, and everyone at once. I didn't flinch. Behind him, my brother Brian chuckled. "Couldn't miss the show, huh?" I walked past them both and took my seat. Row 2 end chair with a crooked name tag that read, "Dr. Monroe guest, not contributor." A small nod to his control. My mother sat beside Brian, dabbing her lips with a lace handkerchief as if dusting off shame. She didn't look at me. They were all in place. The perfect tableau. The banner above the podium read, "Advancing National Defense Through Science." Funny. The program listed 8 names, all men, 5 of whom had directly referenced my work in their papers, one of whom I'd co-authored with under his name. That had been the price of being allowed in. I listened to the introductory remarks. Applause flag salute, a tribute to a fallen officer. All by the book. Then came the cue, and now the MC said we invite retired Colonel David Monroe, father of one of our honored contributors, to share a few words. My father stood. There was applause, respectful, not warm, mostly because of the uniform he'd once worn, not the man wearing it. He adjusted the mic, smiled, and then began his monologue. "Good afternoon," he said. "Some of you know me. I've spent 30 years watching this country evolve in how we define courage. I've seen heroes in mud and fire, and I've seen confusion, laughter, tight. My son Brian," he continued gesturing, "earned his standing not through titles, but through action, through risk, through operations where failure meant death, not just a bad grade." Another chuckle from the front row. "And don't get me wrong," he said, tilting his head like it pained him to say it, "education matters. But some people think you can rack up degrees like Boy Scout badges and suddenly you're a warfighter." He glanced directly at me. "3 PhDs, he added, none of them in combat, none of them tested under fire. I raised my children to understand that real value isn't what's printed on a certificate. It's proven, lived, bled for. I didn't move. My daughter's ideas," he continued. "Interesting, but untested, unapplied. Because theory isn't sacrifice." That's when it hit me, not the insult. I was used to that. But the silence afterward, the way the audience sat unsure if they should clap. He hadn't just erased me. He'd framed me as ornamental, peripheral. The MC returned awkwardly. "Thank you, Colonel Monroe, for your perspective." They moved on quickly, calling the next speaker. I tuned out the words. I was watching the shadows, and then from the back he appeared. Tall, measured, wearing a dark pressed uniform, his shoes silent on the stone. General Howard K. Easley, the highest-ranking officer at Langley's military intelligence branch, and a ghost from my past. I hadn't seen him since he visited my PhD defense in Switzerland unannounced, sitting in the back row, arms folded. He'd never spoken that day, just watched, and then left nodding once. Now he was walking directly toward me. The crowd noticed. Their heads turned. Conversations stalled. General Easley didn't break stride. He didn't stop at the stage, didn't greet the colonel, didn't acknowledge the MC. He walked until he stood 2 feet in front of me. Then he paused. My heart didn't race. It slowed. "Dr. Monroe," he asked, his voice low, precise. I stood, not because I had to, because something in his tone demanded stillness. "Yes, sir," I said quietly. And then he said it, a sentence so soft, yet it sliced through the air like steel. "Permission to speak freely, ma'am." The silence after that was absolute. No one knew what he meant. But I did. My father shifted uncertain. My brother stared. My mother, her knuckles turned white on her lap. And I nodded once. "Yes, sir," I said. "Granted." The moment after I said, "granted," something shifted. Not in the air, but in the room that wasn't a room. A courtyard suddenly quieter than any briefing I'd ever given behind closed doors. General Easley squared his shoulders and turned not to the audience, not to my father, but directly to me. His eyes stayed locked on mine as if the rest of the world was peripheral, like he was addressing a classified file only I had the clearance for. Then he said it. "You're the reason we made it out of Sarajevo." My lips parted slightly. The name landed heavy in my chest. A moment I'd buried, coded, and redacted even in memory. The courtyard still hadn't breathed. General Easley took 1 step back, not a way down. He stood tall, then did something no one in my family had ever done to me. He saluted. A crisp, deliberate, straight-backed salute that froze every sound, every bird, every rustling leaf above us. People turned their heads confused. Murmurs erupted. Colonel Monroe, the man who had raised me, who'd spent decades perfecting his posture of power, twitched. His hands clenched behind his back. He didn't salute. Brian shifted in his seat. General Easley held the salute for 3 full seconds, then dropped his hand and turned, finally addressing the courtyard. "For those of you who don't know," he said, voice steady but laced with command, "Dr. Monroe isn't here as a guest. She's the architect behind the autonomous fail-safes that protected over 400 soldiers in Operation Cobalt Dusk, including me." Silence again, but different now. My father's mouth tightened. His jaw flexed like he wanted to bite the moment in half. She predicted the cyberworm breach 12 hours before the brass took it seriously, General Easley continued. Wrote the protocol herself. Overrode a 6-chain delay to push it through. Without her, we would have had boots inside a compromised kill box. He let that hang, then added calmly, "That's real warfighting." There it was, the sentence that changed everything, not because it praised me, but because it rewrote their story. General Easley nodded once toward me, then toward the stage. "You can take it from here." And then just like that, he left. No handshake, no photo, no need to stay. He hadn't come for publicity. He'd come to speak a single truth, and it had landed like a precision strike. The MC, clearly shaken, fumbled to adjust. "Well, we'd be honored if Dr. Monroe, would you—" He motioned to the podium. For a breath, I stood still. Then I stepped forward. Each footstep cracked slightly on the stone, not loud, but definitive. I passed my father. He didn't meet my eyes. I passed Brian. His knee bounced. I stood behind the podium, the sun now angled across my face. I didn't need notes. I looked up at the banner again, advancing national defense through science. For once, it didn't feel ironic. I didn't raise my voice when I spoke. I wasn't going to say anything today, I began. I was told I wasn't on the list, and I accepted that. Pause. But I've spent most of my life writing protocols in the shadows, writing the kind of safety that doesn't get headlines or medals or stages. My voice remained calm, steady, almost quiet enough that they had to lean in. And I've been told many times that what I do isn't real sacrifice, that unless it's on the battlefield, it doesn't count. I glanced toward my father. He sat motionless. I disagree. I let that breathe. Sacrifice is staying awake for 36 hours straight while you're simulating blast radius variances in civilian zones. It's watching your code get ignored for 6 weeks until someone dies. It's signing an NDA so airtight you can't even tell your mother why you cry at night. Now even my brother looked pale. "I don't need a spotlight," I said. "I just needed one person to see, to acknowledge not the degrees, but the duty." And he had. General Easley had. I closed the speech softly. I dedicate my work to those who never got the credit, who held the line from behind a screen, behind a signal, behind silence. And I stepped down. I didn't wait for applause. I didn't expect any. But it came anyway, scattered at first, then rising. Not the empty, polite claps from earlier, but something else. I walked back to my seat, and as I passed my father, he finally looked up at me. Just 1 second. His face was unreadable, but the color had drained from his cheeks. And in that breath of silence, I knew he'd just realized something terrifying. He no longer held the pen to my story. It didn't feel like victory. Not in the loud firework way people imagine it. It felt like quiet, like the soft closing of a heavy door, like the echo after a bell. When I walked out of that courtyard, I didn't look back. I didn't need to. The words had landed. The silence had spoken. The man who shaped my childhood had sat frozen not by volume, but by one sentence spoken calmly by a man who had seen real war and real power. And for once, he wasn't the one who delivered it. That night, I didn't attend the post-event dinner. I went back to the hotel room alone. No badge around my neck, no stage lights, no nameplate on the table. Just me and the silence I'd earned. I turned off the news, the emails, even the security feed that pinged me every 4 hours out of habit. And I breathed, not the shallow managed breaths of protocol and survival, but something fuller. There was no applause in the room, no one congratulating me. And still, it was the most peace I'd felt in years. Around midnight, there was a knock at the door. I debated ignoring it, but when I checked the peephole, it wasn't who I expected. Not Brian, not my father, not a media hound. It was someone older, civilian clothes, quiet posture. General Easley. He was holding nothing, no papers, no agenda, just himself. I opened the door. He nodded. "I won't stay long." I stepped aside wordlessly. He sat down on the edge of the armchair like a man who'd done this before, entered a room not to speak, but to offer presence. After a moment, he said, "I never forgot that simulation you wrote for Sarajevo. I memorized it." I raised an eyebrow. He continued, "After the mission, I got the file redacted. I made sure your name was preserved inside the core chain, even if the outside credit was scrubbed." I didn't speak. He leaned forward slightly. "I've read a lot of strategy in my years, but yours, it didn't just protect lives. It predicted behaviors, human failure. It planned for weakness with compassion, not arrogance." I blinked. He wasn't here to praise me. He was here to witness me. "There's a difference. I don't know what your father told you growing up," he added, "but no commander worth anything ignores a mind like yours." Then he stood. That was it. No medal, no handshake, no need for more. Just recognition. Real, quiet, irrefutable. He left without waiting for thanks. I sat there long after the door closed, staring at nothing. Because for the first time, the silence around me didn't feel like exile. It felt like ownership. A week later, my father sent an email. Not a call, not a visit, just a flat formal subject line, "Family debrief, post-event clarification." I didn't open it. There was nothing in that inbox I needed anymore. Brian texted once. "Can we talk?" I didn't reply. I wasn't angry. I wasn't punishing him. I was just done offering myself to people who only listened after someone powerful told them I mattered. I booked a flight solo to a quiet island off the coast of Maine. No internet. Just wind pages and silence. And I started writing again. Not code, not strategy. Just thoughts. Fragments. The truth as I remembered it, not as others edited it. I wrote about the years I spent erasing myself to earn proximity. About the sting of being brilliant but unwanted. About the exact moment I realized power wasn't about volume, it was about timing. I wrote for no one, and that oddly made it the clearest I'd ever been. Months later, the department reached out again. They wanted me to consult on a hybrid AI defense protocol. High clearance, black-level access. But this time I set the conditions. I would work for my own lab, I would choose my own team, and my name would be listed first. They agreed. No pushback, no negotiation. They knew better now. That was the thing about power. Real power. It didn't beg. It didn't argue. It simply stepped into the room. And everything shifted. Years later, my work would protect thousands more. But none of that felt as powerful as that single moment in the courtyard. When my father looked at me and realized the silence he once used to diminish me, I now carried like a weapon. And I wielded it without shouting, without revenge, just presence. He may never say the words, he may never understand, but he will never forget the sight of a general saluting me in front of everyone he wanted to impress. He will never unhear the sentence that stripped his story away. And that is enough, because some battles aren't won with noise. They're won with one sentence, one breath, one quiet truth, whispered at the right time.